Hello, hello. Welcome to the Kensington Corner. I'm Tom.
And I'm Jeff.
Today, we're going to be talking about the science of strength with Chris Dellasega, the owner and operator of Athletic Strength Institute here in Lawrence, Kansas. Hey, Chris, how are you?
All right. How's it going, guys?
Pretty good.
Glad to have you on today.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Very nice. So what got you started in the background and training? Why don't you go ahead and give the viewers a little background information about yourself?
Yeah. Well, I'll be honest with you. I mean, a big part of it was bullying in high school. So I didn't necessarily mature as quickly as a lot of the other guys that I grew up with. So I made kind of an easy target. So, they got into athletics and I was into more of, art, history, and that sort of thing. My dad's an artist, and so it came naturally to me. But I'd always had an interest in the military as well. And so I kind of started my senior year of high school. I started getting in shape. Weights had always been around at my uncle's house. So I was no stranger to lifting weights and to working out. When we were in middle school, our PE teacher had a gym that was about 4 blocks away. So on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, we'd load up into his 4Runner and off we'd go to the gym down the way. But then, I started, I'd always been interested in the military. My uncle served in Vietnam as well. It was an infantryman, 70 to 71. And I just started to think about the Marine Corps. I mean, I really didn't have any trajectory necessarily in my life. And so I thought, that could certainly provide me some, direction in my life. So I started getting, lifting to get ready for boot camp. So went to Little Rock, Arkansas, did all the testing with the Corps and everything. But I have a late May birthday. So I would have gone in on what's called the delayed entry program.
Right. Yeah.
And so I wouldn't really have gotten to do anything training wise for a year. So I would have basically sworn in all that and then would have gone on, to basically a year later. So I decided that, a lot can change in a year's time. And so I was like, well, if the testing is still going to be good when that time comes, then I'm just going to, I'm not going to sign anything right now. And I'm just going to, hang out until that time comes. And then I decided, not to do it. And I met a guy that was actually a former special operations guy at the gym. And he was into a bodybuilding competition. And so I, kind of befriended him. And he took me under his wing. There's about a 12-year age difference. But he took me under his wing and we started working out. And then I just started getting into bodybuilding competitions from there. And it kind of evolved, really from there. So that would have been in 1997, 98. Yeah. And then it just kind of morphed from there.
And that was your first bodybuilding competition was 97, 98?
Yeah. So I competed in my first one in 1998 and took second in the teenage division. And then from there, would space the shows out a little bit. And so about a year or so. So I didn't compete for another year and then competed 4 other times after that across, a couple of divisions.
Very good. So kind of other than just the getting involved in the bodybuilding and whatnot, I mean, what happened, I mean, professionally for you after, kind of that decision to go a different route other than the Marine Corps?
I started, the funny thing about it was the fact that like I was working at it was more or less like a coffee bar, juice bar that had, it was a supplement store and had tanning beds. And so it was kind of the place to go in town if you needed any of those things. Right. And so I remember stumbling upon an article, it was more of an advertisement, I guess, in an Iron Man magazine for a guy by the name of Charles Poliquin. And so, I would kind of saw it and was very interested in it. And then I just did some looking on the internet and found his book called The Poliquin Principles. And I read that. I still have that initial copy, and that thing is so dog-eared on the corners and worn through. But the thing was, like, I'm not the biggest guy in the world. I'm not the strongest guy in the world. But from where I was at, I graduated high school 128 pounds soaking wet, right? And so I started, applying these things that I was reading by him. And I was like, oh, shit, this works. Yeah. This actually works. So I'm like, well, I'm not the best, I don't have the best genetics, I'm not very big, like I said, not very strong. But I was noticing some significant improvements in size and strength. And I was like, there's got to be something to this. And so I started getting more interested in the physiology side of things and the anatomy side of things as to like, okay, so why are these things working? And, just kind of upon that quest, of always trying to get bigger and stronger, because as a bodybuilder, I mean, that's always what your goal is. Right. You're looking for any advantage that you can get. And so I started reading into these things, learning more about the body, and then Well, funny. It's not a funny thing. It's just kind of bring it back around. But then my best friend, the guy who got me into this, was a combat veteran and took his own life. And so there was a period in my life there where I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. Quit school, didn't care much about anything. And then, one day I was actually on a roof in Kansas in July, putting a new roof on a house for a buddy of mine that owned a construction company. And I was like, yeah, I'm not doing this.
I can relate to that sort of thing.
Sure. From that point forward, I went down to the university, re-enrolled, and then, and finished my degree that I was pursuing at the time. And then before I even finished that degree, I was like, I think I think I'd like to study, human physiology as a career. Uh-huh. So before I even graduated with my undergrad from Pittsburgh State University, I'd already applied for and was accepted up here. And within 2 months of graduating at Pitt State, I moved up here. And once I started going to classes here, I basically never stopped until I completed my graduate work.
Uh-huh. Right? Yeah. So you've been here in Lawrence ever since then?
Yes and no. Okay. So I was here. So I've held some positions here. I worked for a biomechanical research company in Kansas City, and then came back here, and then kind of actualized my career goal, which was going to work for that gentleman I mentioned previously, Charles Poliquin. Went to work for his company on the East Coast for a year. So from there, we kind of taught other trainers and strength coaches how to use basic and more advanced training techniques, nutrition, supplements, and that sort of thing. Unfortunately, I was laid off from that position. The company did a bit of downsizing, as they say. So moved back here. My wife was granted tenure at the university, and so we've been here pretty much ever since.
Outstanding.
What made you open the gym? Because for a lot of people that don't know, for some reason there's a misconception that owning a business is easy. And it's not at all. It's probably small business owners are probably some of the hardest working people in America. What made you say, this is worth it? Yeah, this is worth it. Because it's a big investment. I've looked at a lot of things like that. I mean, I tell him all the time, I'm going to open an Italian grocery store one day, but you have to have the capital to do things like that and know where your projections are going as far as business wise.
Yes.
What made you say, all right, this is the time.
Yeah,
let's do it.
Well, a large part of it was the fact that, I'd been doing this for a while and had, kind of been involved in local gyms around the area for a long time. And the one common denominator there was that a lot of the gyms kind of, even though they may not necessarily know it, have the same sort of approach, to training. And so, but the biggest component of that is that it's the shiny object syndrome. It's whatever the latest and greatest thing is.
Right.
And so there's a guy by the name of Brooks Kubik. He's got several books out, but one of the things that I remember him saying in one of his books was, if strength training is so easy, then why do so many people fail to get any kind of results? And that's mainly because they're too concerned with trying out the newest and latest technique and chucking the methods that have been proven to work kind of by the wayside. And so they get distracted very easily. And that kind of describes a lot of gyms just all over the country, really. So really what it was like, okay, well, I have a thorough understanding of the basics of human physiology, stress physiology, biomechanics, anatomy, functional anatomy on top of that. And so it's like, if I don't necessarily have, the athletic ability that somebody has, well, I can certainly use the knowledge that I have obtained along the way from learning from guys who have trained world record holders, right. Multiple Olympians, and then apply, what I've learned with what I've learned in school. To help, someone actually get to where they want to be. And so it's really, in this profession, exercises are the tools of your trade. So if you call a plumber, and you're having a major, plumbing catastrophe, and the guy shows up with a plumber or with a plunger, and that's the only tool he's got, you're in trouble.
Right.
And so it was really just, I'm very confident in what I know and what I've learned along the way. And I know that if it can help me, then it can help, just about anyone.
Right.
And so it was really just like, people want this, right? There's a famous quote that's attributed to Henry Ford, that says, if he would have asked people what they would have wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And so many times people are looking for this style of training and this kind of approach, but they just don't know that they're looking for it. Yeah. And so I kind of wanted to be the first one to bring that sort of approach to the Midwest. Because if you look at the coasts, especially, really anywhere where there's a bigger city, anywhere where there's professional sports teams as well, you'll often find that the model that I have here in place is really, it's not novel. I mean, there's other places that are already doing and implementing this kind of training. I just wanted to scale it down and bring it here because by and large, Lawrence is a pretty health conscious kind of town, given where we are, geographically.
Right. So, kind of to dovetail onto that, like, how would you describe your training style then?
Well, the thing is, like, there's two terms that I really dislike within this profession. And the first one is personal trainer, and the second one is strength coach. Personal trainer makes me think of somebody having someone stand on top of a Bosu ball while doing a shoulder press with one arm and a kettlebell curl in the other. Strength coach makes me think of fat, pasty white guys with bald heads and beards in tracksuits. I'm very opinionated on those sorts of things because those two things are more or less what the vast majority of people identify with. Those are the terms that they understand. So my approach is more of an exercise science based, right? And so one adage that I like to use is the fact that, like, you don't have to know how to fly an F-14, we'll just say, in order to know how to work on one, right? So that is one thing that really kind of drives me crazy, is the fact that if you apply that same philosophy to a lot of other areas, that would be similar to saying that there's no way an oncologist could know anything about cancer unless they've had cancer themselves. Mm-hmm. There's no way that a cardio rehab expert could know anything about cardiorespiratory health unless they've had a heart attack, right? So there's a lot of other professions that, that same sort of mindset doesn't apply to. And so it's really just combining a lot of different things. Like, number one, what is someone's ultimate goal? What do they want to achieve? So if it's I work with a lot of cyclists, for example. So if it's cyclists that needs to be more powerful, well, what are the physical attributes that make someone more powerful, right? And we break those down to their constituent parts, and then we start to work on improving those areas, right? And so obviously, if you take that same sort of mindset, but then you apply it to football. Well, American football is a very different sport than cycling, right? And so it's essentially identifying what the physical, what the athletic abilities that they need to improve upon, and then breaking it down into, kind of a structured training program that addresses those needs. Another one is, like, what are the most commonly associated injuries with a particular sport? Right. Cycling, it's broken collarbones. In American football, we'll just say knee injuries, right? And so it's a matter of choosing the right exercises and choosing the right approach in order to shore up those areas. And then you can hopefully, injury-proof them, for the lack of a better term. But then we also look at stress physiology, right? Because if you have someone who is a professional athlete, then their what's called allostatic stress load, so just the total amount of stress that they carry in their life, is relatively low. But if you're talking about allostatic load of a college athlete, we'll say, it's generally a bit higher because they've got a lot of other things going on in their lives, right? They're not being paid, essentially to practice their sport. But then the nutrition piece, right? So that's also, folding in, okay, well, let's look at someone's nutrition. Are they meeting the basic requirements? A good example of that would be the recommended daily allowances. Recommended daily allowances were established in the 40s as we prepared to mobilize guys for World War II, and were more or less, identifying the amount of a nutrient that is needed to prevent a deficiency, right? So it has absolutely nothing to do with optimizing someone's health. But when you factor in that, a lot of people are not even meeting the recommended daily allowances, well, then, you need to work on that. If it's not getting enough protein, if they're chronically dehydrated, there's a lot of low hanging fruit.
Well, and the big thing is, like, so many people are malnutrition, and then they're adding supplements they don't need on top of that, instead of just spending money on food.
Precisely. Yeah.
Getting what they're supposed to be getting, water intake, nutrient intake. But the big thing is, and I don't shop at GNC. So, like, the big thing is that when you go to GNC, you have these guys who are personal trainers, I'm putting that in quotation marks, who are pushing these supplements on people who are basically malnutritioned. And then so they're already not getting any of the nutrients, vitamins that they need throughout the day. Definitely probably not even getting close to their water intake they're supposed to do per day. Right. And then they're taking supplements they just don't need. Yeah. And spending crazy amounts of money, and then saying, well, I don't have the money to eat healthy.
Exactly. And I mean, and that's
vicious cycle.
It is, because I used to manage a GNC, when I was kind of getting into this industry. And so I know their tools, or their tricks of the trade, so to say. So you may go in and you may be wanting a particular kind of supplement for a particular kind of issue, but if they see, money signs, because, the employees at GNC will get, at least it was when I was working there, it was commission based. Yep. And so you get a higher percentage off of the selling of a particular supplement than you would otherwise. And, if you want to, even take take it a bit further, the vast majority of supplements that people are taking are supplements they don't need in the first place. Most of the supplements that people need, should be to either correct a particular nutrient deficiency or to support a naturally occurring process.
Right.
So it's, so there's a lot of things that go into, to my approach. It's, a lot of times in athletic performance, especially, there is more to developing an athlete than squat, bench, deadlift. And I may get some flack for that, but honestly, I don't give a shit because the science of it is very, very clear. And unless you understand, the basics, principles that govern strength training, that govern stress physiology, you're kind of spinning your wheels.
Right. There was one thing I saw on your social media the other day, and correct me if I'm wrong with how I put it, but it was tradition versus science.
Yeah.
Was that it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I saw some comments on there, and you know how I am. Yep. I don't comment on stuff because I just don't get into Facebook. I commented on a Game of Thrones thing the other day and about lost my mind.
Yeah.
So when you talk about science versus tradition, can you expand upon that and what you mean, and then kind of talk about the flack you got for saying that and what you meant by it?
Yeah, for sure. So that's one of the things that you often will see is, especially in this country, like I had a meeting the other day with some professors at the university that are in the exercise science department. And the interesting thing that one of them said was the fact that we don't do sports science in this country, right? What most people think of as exercise science or sports science in this country, we're generally a little bit behind the times when it comes to, when it comes to just any a myriad of things, right? So in this country, we're really rehab heavy. And so, you have these weight rooms or these collegiate programs that will have, multi-million-dollar rehab facilities. And then maybe they'll have a couple dozen thousand or a couple $100,000 weight training facility. And so, I'm not saying that either one is a bad thing, but if it was to be a bit more balanced, then you would have it would be a bit more balanced and you wouldn't have a lot of injuries that could potentially be prevented otherwise. So really what I meant by that was the fact that a lot of times what you see is coaches, especially head sports coaches, oftentimes are the ones who don't have any kind of background in anything human physiology or performance related.
Right.
They're sports coaches. And so they more or less, they let tradition steer their approach to training.
Right.
I've read before, and I think it's pretty accurate, that the most dangerous phrase in the English language is "this is the way we've always done it."
Yeah.
And nowhere does that apply more than to athletics programs.
Well, especially because of how much it's evolved in the last, even 10 years, but 30 to 40 years, when a lot of these guys who are mentoring the coaches now, they were coaching 70s, 80s.
Exactly.
Things were done totally different then.
Right. And what I've seen too is that, they have a lot of interns, intern in a weight room. And so, maybe that's their first exposure to organized athletics, right? And so they're learning for someone who more or less came from that same sort of thing. So it's a lot of these same training methods, if you will, or the same approach to training it's archaic. For example, if you look at like a sport we'll just say swimmers, for example, right? So swimming it's a really heavily internally rotation dominant sport, right? So the muscles that internally rotate the shoulder, if you will, are generally overdeveloped at the expense of the ones that provide stability. So they're external rotators, right? But yet you will still have coaches that think that, that swimmers need to be doing overhead lifting, like, we'll just say, hang snatches or something like that. But when it comes down to it, if you were to look at them and do a thorough kind of assessment, you would identify the fact that they are internally rotated, right?
Right.
And that's just how they are at rest. And so the structural integrity of their shoulders is compromised right out of the gate just because of the nature of their sport. And so many times what you'll see is coaches who don't know any better necessarily, don't take that into consideration. And then they'll continue to program these kinds of overhead lifts. And then before you know it, you start to have shoulder swimmers that are presenting with some sort of, shoulder pathology. When most of that stuff could be, prevented with the right kind of training program. But in, MIDI programs, the coaches that are responsible for developing their training programs don't have the background that it takes in order to put together something that's a bit more sound, right. to train to their weak links. That's really what it comes down to. And that's something that I have, that I work with a lot with the cyclists, and so a lot of the cyclists that I work with are endurance athletes. They're road racers, if you will, right? And so many of them don't necessarily, put much of a priority on their strength training. And so when I say that tradition, is kind of used to steer their approach to their sport, well, that's the way that it's always been done. And I've heard some interesting stories before, like a guy that I know, was a competitive cyclist back in the 80s. And he was talking about how, some of the professional cyclists would have those chair lifts like you see the elderly use to get from the first floor to the top floor. It's installed in their homes so they could save their legs, as they put it. And so it's just things like that, and so it's really just kind of using the science to kind of steer the ship, and a lot of people will say, well, it's it's usually the other way around. Experience will then dictate the science and that sort of thing.
Right.
But really what it comes down to is like there are certain things that govern strength training that are pretty much accepted as fact, right? Rate coding is rate coding, okay? A motor unit is a motor unit. The Henneman size principle is the Henneman size principle. So there are just basics that I think a lot of strength coaches and a lot of trainers, they've never had any exposure to it. And if you haven't, then it makes it easier to kind of resort back to using tradition to guide your approach to training instead of the science.
Well, and the problem with that is that most personal training platforms now, they only push like cookie cutter basically exercises. There is no actual knowledge. When you can go online and you can have a personal training certificate within 24 hours with no prior knowledge.
Right. Right.
I agree. I also have not a vendetta against high school coaches, but I do feel I've talked about this before. My basketball coach in high school was the special education teacher. Wasn't very good at basketball. Wasn't a good athlete. And he had assistant coaches who were good coaches. I have a guy named Glenn Burnett, who was actually very, very intelligent. But then you have the high school, head coach who's kind of just, whatever. And he wasn't qualified for the position, but they don't care.
No.
It's filling a position. But the thing that bothers me is not only on the physical aspect of that, that's who's mentoring your child. That you know what I'm saying? I mean, that's who's teaching them when you're not around how to be an adult. And that's a dangerous really game.
I mean, I'll just share with you, kind of a quick story that I'm working through right now. I've got a young guy that comes in that trains who is, he's a sophomore in high school. And as training has gone along, he's kind of started to let me know that he's, certain exercises bother his lower back. And so, I'm very good friends with a lot of chiropractors and soft tissue therapists. And so, I got in touch and I said, okay, if you're a 16-year-old boy who hasn't really figured out how to listen to his body, how would you describe a bulging disc? And so my friend got back to me and said, well, it may present like this, or he may complain of this.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, almost everything that the chiropractor said is exactly what this young man was complaining of, right? And so as time went on, I have no doubt in my mind that he has, he's got the start of a bulging disc. And he's 16 years old. No 16-year-old boy or 16-year-old period should have a bulging disc that's the result of an ill-advised training program, because that's ultimately what this comes down to. And so I asked him, are there other guys on the team that are suffering from this as well? And he's like, yeah, there's about 7 other guys on the team that are having low back issues.
Right.
Now, this is a problem because he's 16 years old, which means that he's got 2 more years of lifting in this particular program. Well, he's got the physical size, and from what I've been told, I've never seen him play except for his highlight reels. He's got the skill set necessary on the field as well in order to play at a fairly high level. However, unless they change things at this particular school and the way that they approach their training, 2 more years of lifting in this program is long enough for that bulging disc now to become a herniated disc.
Yeah.
And so now you've taken a kid that has potential to play at the Division I level, and he's damaged goods now, and you're going to have to disclose that. And so that makes a Division I possibility, a Division I scholarship, now a Division II, and maybe a part scholarship. And something like that. So my, philosophy to training, especially younger athletes, is the fact that no promising athlete should have their athletic career cut short because of a coach who doesn't know what he's doing or an ill-advised training program.
Right.
Now, I'll take it a step further, too, because many times what you will find is that, like you were kind of alluding to, these teachers, because let's face it, they're not coaches by and large. They're teachers first. That's what they are, right? They don't have any kind of continuing education credits whatsoever. it's not enough to know that the squat's a good exercise. You have to know how to coach the squat. You have to know what to regress to if they can't perform it properly, right? But they don't have that training. So what they end up doing is like, okay, well, who's the winningest team right now at the Division I level? Clemson or Alabama. All right, well, let's take what Clemson and Alabama is doing, right, and then impose that on a group of junior high and high school kids. Well, that's not how it works. You've got guys that are playing at Alabama and Clemson that could very easily go and play in the NFL, right, versus a group of 16-year-old boys who still, are still maturing, right? They're still developing, not only physically, but also mentally. And so they don't have, the mental or the physical development yet in order to participate in a program that is basically built for guys that are NFL caliber.
Right.
And that's a huge problem. The same chiropractor that I mentioned mentioned a few minutes ago, has seen more broken kids as the result of ill-advised training programs at the high school level than anyone should ever see. But the other side of that, too, is that these coaches and teachers oftentimes are very, very resistant to any kind of outside help, which is kind of, this may, again, cause a little bit of ruffled feathers out there. But when it comes down to it, right, these guys think they're coaching the fucking Patriots in their 7th Super Bowl championship. That's a problem. Because when you're talking about a size of a town, or a town the size of Lawrence, where you got 90,000 people, right, 30 of which are temporary students at the university, it's a small town. It's a very small town, and so a lot of these teachers need some sort of continuing education, and the governing body, that oversees high school athletics should be the ones to ensure that happens. But maybe it'll take some time. Maybe they already are. I don't know. I just haven't seen it yet.
No, I don't. I think it's an American problem. I don't think
it's definitely a one size fits all approach.
Yeah.
And you
Yes,
can
it
see,
is.
and also one of the things that really stuck out to me when you were talking about like this idea of, when you're providing an individualized regimen, you can prevent a lot of injuries is essentially what you're saying, right?
Sure.
You can create a less injury prone athlete.
Right.
And I mean, we see that all across American society, medicine. I mean,
without a doubt,
weightlifting, all that.
Yeah.
Kind of not to switch gears on you here, but we talked a lot about the physical, I guess the mechanical approach to. Can you talk maybe a little bit about like the mental and emotional approach to weightlifting and creating a better athlete in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'll start with, because this always jumps out at me almost every time I've ever worked with a female athlete, especially at the high school level. And that is the fact that the number of female high school athletes that I've worked with, who you can tell just by your initial interactions with them, especially once you get comfortable around one another, how many of them have never had any kind of positive coaching experience.
Right.
And to me, that's really, really frustrating because there's a lot of sports psychology out there. I mean, it goes as far back as Muhammad Ali. If you've ever watched old newsreel footage of him, where he's doing that positive self-talk, I am the greatest. Well, there's a lot of psychology research out there to back that up. Right. If you believe that you are the greatest, well, that is like a straight shot of confidence, and that's something I think that a lot of times it kind of goes. That sort of approach to training and that sort of mindset is the mental aspect of the physical training side of things, right? I call it the Betty Crocker approach, one recipe for everybody, right? Well, that's exactly what that is, right? And so, one of the things that I try to do with folks is to build them up, right? Specifically choose exercises, just as an example, that they need as part of their program, right? And one of the best things to do in that situation is if you choose an exercise that that they're not going to be good at because, your assessment dictates that really, but then you help them with that. You help them learn the movement, right? And then before you know it, they're smashing what they were able to do. And just that in and of itself, a lot of times is just a boost of confidence. I one time had a female athlete that I was working with that, came from like I don't want to say an ultra endurance background, but definitely an endurance background. And so I knew that she was getting ready to apply for a new job. And so she goes and has the interview and all of this. And, it was kind of one of those throwback settings where, they had her write down a figure on a sheet of paper and slide it across the table and, whatever. And so that's how the interview went down. She wrote down the figure that she wanted and slid it across the table, and they agreed to give it to her. And she came back in the next time that we were scheduled to train. I don't think there was anybody in the weight room, but at one point she kind of stops and she looks at me right in the eye and she says, I have to tell you something. I'm like, okay, well, what's that? And she said, before I started strength training, I don't know that I would have even had the confidence to apply, for that job. And so, I think that just the empowerment that someone gets by overcoming something that is maybe difficult for them, their first exposure to, helps with the confidence level. I've had no shortage of female athletes, a couple that I trained this morning that came from, a kind of endurance backgrounds, if you will. And the one lady has gotten up to a 295-pound deadlift for 2 reps. And, as she was building up to that over the subsequent weeks, I kind of told her, I was like, there's something very satisfying about, lifting a heavy weight and knowing that, if you're in the gym in a commercial gym setting, that you're probably the only female in there that can do that, right. Like by a lot. That does a lot for your confidence levels. Yeah. I've had guys that are on the U.S. national team, cycling team, that, have said more or less the same thing. Kind of the guy that I've worked with the longest, his name's Ashton Lambie. He's the fastest man on 2 wheels over a 4-kilometer distance, fastest man in the world over a 4-kilometer distance on 2 wheels. Has said before to me and then also to his teammates that if he can get a lift a day or two in, a day or two before a big, World Cup event or something like that, he always rolls up to the line feeling so much more confident and so much stronger. And so we're trying to kind of impart that wisdom, if you will, to some of the other guys.
Yeah. And, that actually kind of goes along with something Thomas and I talk about a lot. And that's that I think that, a lot of people don't understand the fact that, a lot of times your mindset, your mental toughness is what what dictates your physical ceiling, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of times, I've said to Tommy, that's one of the things I learned in the Army is like a human's ability to suffer is like so much farther beyond what you think it is. Yeah. And it's, I guess kind of when you're constantly in here every day and you're always moving that ceiling up, right. Like that's just a really great life lesson that kind of radiates to every other part of a person's life, isn't it?
It really does. I mean, because some of these, the 2 ladies that I was mentioning there previously are both faculty members of the university. And so one of them in particular has it's a very male-dominated field that she's in. But since she started strength training, she doesn't necessarily feel as intimidated in these big meetings as she once did.
Right.
And I think there's something that that kind of transcends just the physical aspect of it too. But what you're capable of doing physically, should impact what you can do, mentally just the same. Right. And I think I was introduced to that, at a very early time, like almost, when I started getting into this, really heavy. And that was, kind of hitting these workouts that my buddy would do, like so at one point he worked for the railroad and, they'd have these long trains. He was an engineer, so he'd be in the front. And, they'd have these shuttle vans that would more or less drive the length of the train to pick the guys up and drive them back to the, their headquarters or whatever you would say. But he would make a point to not, right? So he would basically sprint 2 cars length, right? And then drop and do, 50 push-ups or something like that. Hop up, sprint another 2 car lengths, and then drop down and do 100 sit-ups. And he'd do this all the way back down the train, and so you talk about the pain cave. I mean, when you're an 17, 18-year-old kid and you're working out with somebody like that, but you don't know otherwise. You've never done it any other way, that I think has given me, the mental tools, if you will, to do this, to open the gym, because I've also got 2 little kids as well, And so, I mean, I put in usually about training wise, anywhere, usually about 55 hours a week. I mean, that's not all just personal training or one-on-one training. But it's doing all of the other stuff that makes the gym go round, right? So
there's a lot of background stuff.
There's a lot of background stuff.
Yeah, kind of what Tom was saying. Just being a small business owner. My parents are small business owners. I mean, and literally, you cannot understand it unless you've been around it and been a part of it.
Yes.
I mean,
there's a whole nother stress that goes into it as well. Owning your own business puts a pressure on you that. Because you have to make it.
Yes.
You don't have an option.
No.
You know what I'm saying? So there's a, you have to. There is no like, hey, maybe I'll get another job.
No, there isn't that. I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, that's one of the things too. It's like, it is I don't want to say use the term burden, but for the lack of a better term, I'll use that term because I mean, kind of what you're talking about, right? There is no plan B, right? So it's the first thing that you think of when you wake up. It's the last thing that you think of before you fall asleep.
Yep.
It is in the forefront, or at least maybe in the back of your mind, every waking minute of every day.
Yeah.
And for me anymore, especially since I've got two little ones, I mean, it's like, it's not about me anymore. It's about, trying to provide for my kids in such a way that, they'll have it. I didn't have it hard growing up by any means, but, to have it easier than I did, growing up. I think I've heard a quote before is that, success is when your kids turn out better than you do. And that's, for me, that's a very real thing right now,
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, you have a nice gym too. Like I told you the first time, the story about when I first came over here, I'll tell that real quick. I actually think Chris thought I was homeless. I had a huge beard.
He did.
I just got back from Italy. It was turning dark at night, and I'm walking my dog, staring through this garage door that they have here at the Athletic Strength Institute. And I did not know that anyone was here as they're watching me. And so they're like waving me off, and I'm like, hey, yeah. So, but I called Chris the next day. I was like, man, I really want to check out the gym because it looks cool. Like it has a niche of its own here in Lawrence, because you don't see this very often, and you're in an up and coming area now. I mean, they have all the streets here closed off today because they're having the food truck festival, but within 5 to 10 years, this is going to be one of the main hubs of Lawrence. It's turning into that now that you have all the businesses down here.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard, I've talked with people that know people, how it goes, right? And the funny thing is that no one generally, unless they're intimately involved with the project, knows exactly what's been given the green light for development or whatever. Right. But everybody knows enough about the area or who has ties to the area to say, like, this is definitely an up and coming area.
So. Well, I recently just moved back to Lawrence. I did my first undergrad here, and I came over when I first came over here. I couldn't believe everything that was over here, because this just used to be East Lawrence. I mean, there was nothing here.
Yeah.
And I mean, you got LBC's right across the road.
Right. Well, I mean, when they first started doing this food truck festival, LBC didn't exist.
Exactly.
Bon didn't exist. None of this existed. They just did it because I think this was an open area to do a food truck festival.
Yeah.
And now you have everything.
And you're right on the money, because the property management company that manages the land that we're on here, and then
mine,
your apartment building over there and just down the way, their leasing office was right across the street there, in the professional building. And Tom Larkin, I think, was kind of the driving force behind it initially, and then it started to get bigger and bigger every year. It's gotten, so this will be the 4th year that I've been over here, and it seemingly has gotten exponentially bigger each passing year. So it's a pretty cool area. When I first moved to Lawrence, I lived about we'll say 5 blocks to the south here, and I remember this was kind of, this was a bit of a rundown area.
Absolutely.
There wasn't anything up and coming over here, and when I found this property over here, I was like, this looks entirely different than the last time I was over here. So,
and then you actually went to LBC before it turned into LBC, didn't you?
Yeah. So before they actually started the construction and the renovation over there, we went and looked at that building because at the time it was I think it was just being rented out to a lot of different a lot of artists, and so they'd have like little cubicles set up, and that was kind of just an a artist co-op, I suppose, which is I think since moved down the way to Seedco now. But yeah, we went over there and checked it out, and it was a great big open space. It would have been a great, building for a gym. The downside of it, though, is that it would have cost a lot of rehab, a lot of money to rehab that building to get it to where we needed it to be. And so, we looked at that, and then we actually looked at one just to the south. So, in that building there, right across the way, and it was all hardwood floors that were original floors, but it was again, we would have had to put a lot of money in order to get it to where we were at. And Tom Larkin, once again, is the guy who showed me that space, and he was like, "Well, actually, I've got a property that's just east of that of that location. So if you'd like, I can show you that." And he showed me, and I walked in the door, and it was like, "Oh, this is it. This is it."
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've only been in here a handful of times, with Thomas, and the one thing I will say about this space is I think the word that kind of sums it up best is just intimate, right? Yeah, it's like you come in and you're like, this is home. You're going to get something done in this space. Like it's I guess a little minimalistic is maybe how I'd put it. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's a very intimate setting, and it's a cool place. Like,
well, thank you. It's cool because in the summertime you pop open the garage door, you turn the music up, man, and you just get it. You just get it.
Well, I remember when folks started singing outside of Lawrence Beer Company, we had the garage door open once, and Guns N' Roses was on, and I remember thinking to myself, or I may have even said to whoever I was working with at the time, I was like, the folks outside are getting a blast of some Guns N' Roses right now because they were downwind from us. But no, I mean, that's what, kind of bring it back here real quick is, when I started putting together the equipment list for this facility, there's a guy that I used to work for named Stefan Kazul. He owns a Kilo Strength Society in Huntington Beach, California. Before that, I worked for him for the Poliquin Group, and before he had that role, he worked at a place called Central Institute for Human Performance in St. Louis. And so when he was working in St. Louis, he worked with, if you were a professional athlete from the Blues or from the Rams or from the Cardinals, and you got outside training, then what was provided by the team, that's basically where you went to train.
Yeah, Stefan worked with Steven Jackson, didn't he?
Worked with Steven Jackson, worked with David Freese, Chris Carpenter, Matt Holliday. I think he, if I'm not mistaken, I think he did some work with Albert Pujols at once upon a time. So he worked with a lot of high-name guys. And so, when I started putting together my equipment list, I sent it over to him and I said, okay, well, if this is the kind of population that we want to train, which is generally recreational athletes, high school athletes, professional athletes, and general population, what do we need? What would you keep from this list? What would you get rid of? And so, through a couple of email exchanges, this is essentially what the result of that conversation was. And so it's like, we don't have a lot of, fluff machines, if you will.
Right.
I mean, everything that we have in here was chosen for a very specific reason. And, here we are 4 years into it. And there's only, I think, 3 pieces of equipment that I feel like I would very much like to add. And they're kind of, one of them is a pendulum squat's kind of an auxiliary piece, but for people who are interested in, fat loss and that sort of thing, it's a pretty good piece of equipment to have. For the athletes, I'd like to get a seated calf raise and an anterior tibialis machine just because, like the feet and the ankles are probably the most underdeveloped in areas. And, just from a performance perspective, I usually will, kind of ask, well, how many primary joints are there above your ankles? Well, it's kind of a trick question because almost all of your primary joints are above your ankles, right? So, we know the squat is a good exercise, to develop lower body leg strength and power. But what you will often see is that it starts with the ankles, right? So if somebody can't squat to depth, or they have, they can't squat past a particular point without their heels starting to peel up off the floor. Well, addressing the muscles that plantar and dorsiflex the ankle are where you have to start. Because if you improve someone's ankle flexibility, calf flexibility, then that's going to transfer all, further up the kinetic chain. And that's a lot of times what will keep someone from, getting any better in a squat.
Right. What would you say right now, small business owner, gym owner, an anti-strength coach, what would you say is the biggest obstacle you're finding as far as training and getting what you're wanting moving forward?
I would say, probably the biggest obstacle is helping people unlearn the myths that they have learned and heard their entire life.
Yeah.
The whole, just the squat, like we were just talking about, right? The whole idea that you shouldn't let your knees go over your toes. Well, that is a study that's been debunked multiple times now.
Yeah. Well, and the problem is you have people, though, that, I didn't mean to cut you off, but you have people that's their parents. I've trained people before where, I literally tell them the same thing and they'll come in the next time and be like, my mom said you don't put your knees over your, and I'm like, gee,
right.
And your mom's paying me to train you, though.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Precisely. And so, what I've done is more or less started a stockpile, if you will, and collect a database,
right,
of those particular research articles that more or less put that myth to rest. And so it's one of those things where, don't confuse my 21 years of experience in my academic background with your Google search or the way that you've always done it. Once again, the most dangerous phrase in the English language, right? Well, that's the way that we've always done it. And so, it's that sort of thing. And, one of the things that I found many times is that it's a lot easier to get someone to do what you want them to do if they understand at least a little bit why you're having them do it in the first place. Absolutely. Right. So there's that. The other side of it, though, is too that, one of the biggest things that obstacles that I see standing in the way of people making it to where they want to go, as far as like their performance goals or health goals go, is that there's no planned variation within their training program, right? And so a 4-week or 6-week training program may look good in and of itself, but you're not going to make a whole lot of changes to where you want to go in 6 weeks, right? And so a program needs to flow from one phase, if you will, to the next phase with some sort of common theme, right? And so I was working with a guy that's going to be an intern here over the summer, and he was talking about low back pain, and so we started looking at his squat. And so I asked him, I was like, so do you squat basically all year long? He's like, oh yeah, dude, like all year, like,
every day,
almost, right?
Yeah, every day.
Twice a week, squat every day, twice a week. And I'm like, okay, well and so then I explained it to him this way, right? And so, have you heard of tennis elbow? Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the reasons that people develop tennis elbow is because of the consistent number of soft tissue loadings, what's called an overuse injury, right? So they're loading the structures of the elbow over and over and over and over and over. And that starts to bring, imbalances. Well, it's the same thing if all you do is squat all year long. Squat. Well, you're going to start to, develop some particular imbalances. And so it's a good idea to vary, your loading parameters in some way, shape, or form. A loading parameter can be, varying the exercise selection, changing the stance, elevating your heels versus both feet flat on the floor. And I'm a huge proponent of using the split squat as an adjunct to a squat, right? So if you're talking about a football player, and football has got the longest off season, or one of the longest off seasons. NHL hockey frequently has the shortest off season, depending on how far they've made it into the off season. And so as a player is coming out of season, that's when you want to start to work on those little structural imbalances. And so using things like a split squat, right, to improve someone's single leg strength and flexibility. And then as their camps or their season starts to near, well, then you start to move that exercise down the list of priorities, and you replace it with bigger lifts, right? Because you can get a better, nervous system activation with a heavy squat than you can with a split squat, right? So it's really using or having the knowledge to know, when to place an exercise in a particular training program in order to get the biggest bang for your buck. Because after about 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 exposures of that particular lift, the law of diminishing returns then, applies. So, that lift is going to be less and less effective the more that you perform it past that point. Right. The same program is going to be less and less efficient. And so I would say that's one of the biggest things is people don't have any continuity to their training. And there seems to be this new movement too, where people have just shucked periodization just out the window almost.
Yeah.
And I think that is a huge mistake, because it doesn't matter if you're working with maybe a soccer mom, we'll just say, that wants to lose maybe 15 pounds or something like that. You still need to have some sort of common theme and some sort of structured approach in order to helping her, achieve that goal. And because otherwise, you're just doing, you may get flack for this too, but otherwise you're just doing CrossFit, And I mean, when it comes down to it, the body needs a minimum number of exposures in order to get any kind of adaptation.
Right.
And so if you're trying to improve, this, that, and the other thing all at once, well, your body most of the time will just get to a point where it's like it doesn't know what it's supposed to adapt to, and then it just stops.
Yeah.
Or your backslide.
I mean, I'm a big fan of just doing something, but the problem is that you have people who, especially in this industry, you have clients who will have a certain goal in mind, or have a certain, we'll use the word goal. That'll be, I say vision or image in mind. And they want to get there, but it's a big, I call it like the anti-vaxxer movement. We kind of have that going on in the fitness world as too. There's a lot of articles that they're like,
bro science.
Well, bro science, pseudoscience.
Yeah.
Because bro science is, I'm a big bro guy.
Yeah.
Bro science is, from a very early age, you're taught just load the bar and go.
Yeah.
And that's one of the dumbest things you can do. I usually don't even squat over like 135, especially after I tore my PCL. I just don't. And I do a lot of split squats. But it's weird, the stigma that's put into weightlifting, because you see a guy doing a split squat, right? A guy my size doing a split squat, like, oh, that's a female like lift, right? Mm-hmm. But the guy saying that, I'll out squat every day.
Yep.
And so there's that to it. But when you're looking at a client, it's a bro science approach to it. But the thing is that you have someone, you're telling them, hey, do this. This is why we're doing it. And you come to find out that there's only a few % that will really do it how you want them to. And then they're the ones that get the results.
Yep.
And then you have people, I told Chris, this has been several years ago. I had somebody who would it was about every 90 days would be like, well, I'm not getting the results I want. And then I'd break down. And this is back when I was doing nutrition plans, which I do not do anymore. I just don't. People don't follow them. They're not honest with you about it. And I would talk to them and then come to find out, the guy's drinking a 6-pack every night.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you're not losing any weight. And it's not because of what I'm doing. It's what you're doing.
Right.
And then, one of the big things too is that people hit on cheat meals all the time. I think cheat meals are great. If you count the amount of meals you eat per week, and I think Chris and I's number, varies on this. I think Chris says 17 out of 21. If you're eating 17 good, that's about right. I go as low as 15. But I'm not saying go out and pig out all the time, but I eat pizza. I like pizza.
Yeah.
That's not bad. And then, so there's a certain approach people take to it that they don't necessarily know what they're talking about.
No.
And because of that, the internet has made everyone masters of everything.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's just not true.
No, I mean, it's one of my things too. It's like, well, just because I read a whole bunch of John Grisham novels does not mean that then I'm ready to walk into a courtrum and try a criminal case.
Right.
Yeah,
it doesn't work that way.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, and kind of going back to what you were saying about the idea of cheat meals. Like I'm a diabetic,
right.
So I tend to try to have a relatively strict diet, and. But it's just that idea of sustainability.
Right.
You cannot expect anyone to be perfect all the time.
No.
And you have to have that. You have to have at least some. I mean, granted, I'm sure there are some people that can they can go out and they can eat 21 good meals every week and do all their meal prep and everything. And I'm not the fact of the matter is most people don't have the time in their life for that sort of thing. So
yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about it too is like, perfection does not exist anywhere but in our own minds.
Yeah.
It does not exist in nature, right? And too many people, if they want to start, and like one of the best ways to get someone to set them up for failure is to convince them that they need to do that 21 meals.
Yeah, it is.
Because it does not take into account our natural enjoyment of food.
Right. Yeah.
And that needs to be a huge part of the equation, because kind of what Thomas was alluding to, I think there a few minutes ago, was the fact that, if you let someone, allow or whatever you want to say, someone to eat that kind of that cheat meal, well, it makes it a whole lot easier for them to stay on the program, long term, than if you're trying to get them to eat plain chicken breasts and steamed broccoli, 3, 4, 5 meals out of the day. And that's the thing. It's like, the interesting thing I've run into this with some of the cyclists that I work with, but in a different context, but I'll use the same way. So a lot of these folks, they may go ride like the Dirty Kansas coming up, right? Mm-hmm. What was that, 200-mile race, 100-mile race? And so your ability to ride 100 miles or 200 miles, you don't just go out, get on your bike and then expect to be able to do that.
No,
right?
I couldn't do that.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like, if you want to use the marathon as another example, right? I only run when I'm chased, but you can't expect to go out and be able to run a marathon with a decent time the first time that you strap on running shoes. It doesn't work that way. And nutrition is the same way. If you have somebody, let's just say somebody's 400 pounds, right? Well, they didn't wake up one morning and all of a sudden they're 400 pounds. Right. It's a gradual process. And so the best way, to reverse that timeline is to do just that, right? So I like to say one of my, analogies or whatever that I like to use is, Rome wasn't built in a day and it didn't collapse overnight. And so, that's one of the biggest things that people I have found that I work with have that mindset, though, is that they do need to be 21 meals spot on every time.
It's just not,
but it's not sustainable.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing too, is I would much rather promote my happiness over my diet plan any day of the week.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a few rules I live by. One's, don't go more than 72 hours with working out. Don't eat McDonald's every day. Like, I rarely ever eat McDonald's anyway, but still, it's very, I just think that that when you start putting strict guidelines like that on people, there's almost a natural want to rebel.
Yes, absolutely.
Even if it's even if it's subconscious, there's a natural, like, I'm not doing that shit.
The other thing too is when you have that sort of leeway built into a system, you tend to not overdo it. I mean, even though you're overdoing it compared to what you're normally doing, like maybe you're going out and having pizza with a friend. You're not sitting there eating an entire pizza and drinking a 6-pack of beer. You're enjoying it, but I think a lot of times you have a tendency to enjoy it in moderation.
Yeah. I think what the problem is a lot of trainers do this thing where they set people's diet plans up like they're training them for a competition.
Yep.
And they're not. They're just regular people.
Right.
These people, Chris knows what it takes. I know what it takes to do bodybuilding competitions. It's not fun.
Yeah.
It's not enjoyable.
Yeah.
If it was enjoyable, everyone would do it. It's not fun. It's miserable. And on top of that, why would you want to set a client up like that? Why would you want your client, 14 days into a diet to be like, I can't do this.
Right.
I don't even have the energy to work out today. Yeah. I don't want to eat this crappy food anymore. It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't. And that's one of the things that I'm all, try to get folks to realize too, is that, it's no different than the training aspect of it, right? Is that, kind of there's all of these preconceived notions as to what eating healthy actually is.
Right.
And most of the time it's not nearly as restrictive as what most people would make it out to be. For example, anytime I start working with anybody anymore that's, interested in improving their nutrition, one of the things that I will frequently tell them is use marinades and seasonings to your heart's content.
Yeah.
Because because there's no better way to help someone with their nutrition if you can also help them prepare their food in such a way where they don't actually mind eating it.
Right.
For me, it was always vegetables. I'm not a big vegetable guy. And so but since I've met my wife, she has, kind of shown me how to prepare vegetables in different ways where it's actually that's actually kind of good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when it comes down to it, I have found that nutrition wise, it usually comes down to two things, right? The food has to taste good and it has to be easy to implement. And so it's actually a nice little plug here for Fit Flavor and Optimal Living. But that's one thing that we started doing here at the gym is, providing a meal prep service. And so there's another place here in town that does not custom, but healthy meals. And the best part about it is they get the vast majority, anytime they can, of their produce and of their meats from local farmers.
Right.
And so the best part about it is, not only are you supporting two local businesses when folks purchase those meals, but you're also supporting, local farmers as well.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I think that as far as the nutrition debate goes, as far as, nationwide, it's not going to come from the top down, right? This trickle-down idea has shown repeatedly not to work, and nutrition is no different. And so if it's going to, if things like that, if we're going to start to see, lower diabetes numbers and obesity rates with younger populations, that's how it'll start, right? It'll start with local businesses, helping to get better foods in kids' mouths.
My big thing is that one of the words that are always thrown around is calorie deficient in calories. So how to do a calorie deficient diet, right? And the thing is that it's so simple that it's almost like as a fitness industry, we've overcomplicated it and made all these fad diets just so regular people want to come ask questions, if that makes sense, because it's so simple. It's one of the things if you wanted to burn 400 calories a day, okay, don't go to Starbucks and get the caramel macchiato, which is 240 calories. Yep. Get a cold brew at home, put some stevia extract in it. Bam, there's 200 calories. Yeah. If you're going to make a hamburger, still eat your hamburger. Instead of 80% lean, get 93% lean. There's 255 calories right there. You just took 500 calories off your diet.
Yeah, yeah.
In a day. Exactly. And people are and instead of going out and do these crazy diets, it's just little things.
It's little things that can be implemented on a day-to-day basis, and that's one of the things that I think is it's one of those situations too, where it kind of is like the training aspect of it, in the sense that, the simplest solution sometimes is the one that people are so quick to dismiss because it's seemingly too simple to work.
It's too. Right?
But those little bitty things that you do, they start to add up big time. And so, if there's a principle that if there's one principle that kind of applies itself to my approach to training, just training to include supplementation and nutrition as well, it's the Kaizen principle, Kaizen. And it's a Japanese business philosophy, actually.
Right.
And so ultimately what it means is if you have a large group of folks, right, that are, a business or whatever, and everybody strives to be 1% better, every week, that adds up to a lot over a year's time.
Yeah.
And the same thing can be said with nutrition, right? So it's like what you're saying. You're making these minor little adjustments that over time add up into big improvements. And it's like I've got here at the gym these things called plate mates, and plate mates go up in 5/8 of a pound and 1.25 pounds. And so, if your max bench press is 200 pounds, well, you may not think that 201 pounds is that big of a, well, your body knows, right? And so if you can split the difference and go to 201.25 pounds, right? Well, gradual overload is kind of what I'm going at.
Yeah.
And that can be applied to everything, right? Soft tissue therapy. If somebody's had a previous injury, your body lays down scar tissue, you have adhesions in that tissue. It's not one trip to the massage therapist that's going to clear that up. It's multiple trips, over a short period of time. And, one of the soft tissue providers that I work with a lot, Abby.
Yeah, I just saw Abby yesterday.
That's one of the things that she's said before with some of the clients that I work with that have been over to see her. The more times they can get in to see her in a short amount of time, right, the better the outcome is typically going to be. And so it's one of those things that sometimes people just, they go hardcore. They want to go hardcore. It's like, I'm done with this. I want to get healthier. I want to lose weight. And the only way to do that, plain chicken breast and steamed broccoli.
It's not.
And that's not the correct approach.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think we're about ready to wrap
I'm
it
ready
up.
to wrap up.
I do have one last question for you.
Sure.
And I want to know, where do you see this business and yourself in 10 years?
Oh, yeah. Well, ideally, I would like to, I would like to retain ownership of the business in some way, shape, or form. And if that means, only, being a 10% owner or something like that, that's okay too. But ultimately, for myself, what I would like to do is, go to work for a larger team in a team setting, because a company that I'd worked for previously, we did a lot of work with them, and they were a professional team that's not based in this country. And the second highest paid coaching staff member on their payroll was their strength coach. Right. Head coach was the highest paid coach, and their what they refer to as their sports physio was their second highest paid. Right. So what I would like to do is be able to use the skills that I've learned, the knowledge that I have accrued over 21 years of doing this, and apply it to a team setting. And the interesting thing about that is that many times the teams that are looking for this kind of information are the teams that are not winning.
Yeah.
I don't think Bill Belichick is going to be, too open to changing too many of his training and practicing techniques at this point. Why would he need to? But that's kind of where I see myself. And ideally, with how things are going with USA Cycling and the national team folks that I work with, that's ideally where I would like to be. And, if that means, residing in this country and doing that with, a national team or working for the USOC, that'd be fantastic. But I'm also not relegated to just the United States. Because this stuff, exercise science, for example, is taken way more seriously in other countries. And part of that has to do with the population. In this country, we have a very large population. So our athletic population is also very large, right? Mm-hmm. But in other countries that don't have that kind of athlete capital, as they put it, they are doing everything that they can do in order to keep their, athletes healthy and to protect their investments. And that usually means going and kind of outside the box. Things like food intolerance tests, right? Things like biomechanical research to identify what that knee was capable of doing before it was injured, and then using that as a roadmap to guide your rehab process, that sort of thing. And so that's kind of where I'd like to be. This has been my baby for the last, even though we've been open for 4 years, it's been my baby for about the past 5.5 years. And it would be very difficult to relinquish complete control over it, unless it was for the right reasons. That's kind of where I would like to hit it.
Outstanding. Well, we really appreciate you being on with us today.
Thanks,
it was really enlightening, and really enjoyed having you.
Actually,
thank you.
It was a really good one, man. I really appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you, Chris.
Bye.
Thanks.
All right, guys. We appreciate it. And we'll see you back on the next episode.
Bye.